It's July 29th, and the protests have not ceased. Our attention has recently turned to Portland, where Kate Brown, the governor, is stating that the federal agents in Portland are causing more violence and more harm, whereas Trump is stating that the federal agents will not leave until there is peace. He says, "We're not leaving until they've secured the city." But today it was announced that federal officers will actually be leaving and that the local police will take over guarding the city and the state courthouse. Now, we've seen several instances of police brutality in Portland. One of the more famous incidents that was actually captured on video was a peaceful protester shot by a crowd control munitions. He suffered from facial and skull fractures, and he requires facial reconstruction surgery. He also needed to have blood drained from his brain. There have been mothers, military veterans, nurses, and many other innocent people at the front line who have been hurt and injured by police brutality. Even more frightening is that there have been various kidnappings in states, in Oregon, in New York. This is demonstrative of an authoritarian regime, not a democracy. On the other hand, we have NAACP stating that there are white privileged protesters that are taking advantage of the Black Lives Matter movement and using it for other causes, such as anti-capitalism. But my question to you, NAACP, is, isn't Black Lives Matter anti-capitalist? Now, the reason why I believe that is because the working class is being mobilized to protest against police and the military who are safeguarding capital, right? That's the purpose of these organizations, is to safeguard capital, keep people at the bottom, specifically African Americans, right? So I'm here to speak with a protester who is at the protests in Portland. His name is Joseph Landoni, and he's going to describe his experiences there. I'm here with Joseph Landoni, and he was actually at the protests in Portland recently. And so I wanted to ask you, just how would you describe what was going on there? What was your experience like?
Yeah, for sure. So before I hop into this, I do just want to kind of recenter kind of where we are at in Portland. So I believe today is day 61 of protests in Portland. I've been to 4. And I think it's just important to acknowledge the reason why we are all here and what we are protesting, right? That's Black lives. And I think that that's kind of being muddled, and I think it's being intentionally muddled, by the president. So this has been a kind of a crescendo, right? The moment that the feds were sent to Portland. And the feds were sent to Portland because on the night that the Minneapolis police precinct burnt down, there was a fire set in the Justice Center here in Portland. And that's in downtown Portland, and it's federal property. And so I think that kind of really became the kind of the inflection point that the president saw as a way to potentially agitate. And so these Black Lives Matter protests have been going on for 60 straight days. And they start all over Portland, and then they generally make their way to the Justice Center. And so I participated in 2 marching protests, and now I participated in 2 on the ground protests just in front of the Justice Center. And all of these have been led by mostly Black leaders in our community. And see, Portland's really interesting because it's a liberal city, but it's one of the whitest cities.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting that this is kind of the moment that we're in right now in Portland, because it is a primarily white city. But before I get into just kind of my specific experiences of the recent protests with the feds, I just do think it's important that we remember that everyone who is protesting, we are not protesting Trump. We are not protesting the feds in Portland. We are protesting systematic injustices that Black people have faced in America. That's why we are all here. And it's being, unfortunately, not, I think, completely the protesters' fault, kind of co-opted into, fuck Donald Trump. We want the feds out of Portland, right? So with that being said, I was in Portland at the Portland protests on this last Friday and Saturday, and those were probably some of the largest protests that we've had in Portland. Their estimates were between 3,000 and 5,000 people. Friday night was kind of probably the most traumatic moment that I kind of experienced. I went with just goggles that night and a helmet. Just because obviously we've seen what have happened to protesters. And so people are like, if you're going to come to the Justice Center, you should wear a helmet, have a gas mask. I didn't have a gas mask the first night. And so it was about 9:00 on Friday, and there was probably 3,000 to 5,000 people outside the Justice Center in downtown Portland. And these protests have become more and more isolated, although it kind of people are making it sound like they aren't. They've become more isolated, specifically right in a 3-block center in downtown Portland around that federal Marco Hatfield Justice Center. So, but Friday night, I was with my roommate, Jonah Miller. We were about 40 feet away from the Justice Center fence that the federal government has put up just kind of around the Justice Center to protect the building. And, obviously it's not, no protest is going to be 100% peaceful. And so you hear a lot of justification, for, violence against protesters, that, someone started spray painting the fence. And it just seems like every night these protests these protests end in violence because of someone spray painting, and then either the Portland police or the DHS declaring it a riot. And so at 9:00 on last Friday, I was just kind of standing about 30 feet away from the fence, and I didn't even actually see it, but they started throwing tear gas canisters. And I had never been tear gassed before. And they're kind of hard to see at first. And this woman right in front of us actually got hit right in the head with this canister.
Wow.
And yeah, it was pretty crazy. And no one really noticed. They just saw the smoke kind of coming. And this woman, I don't think really noticed at first what had happened. And she kind of turned around, and kind of the gas started to, get to her, and she kind of fell down.
Oh my God.
And she fell down on like one knee and was like, she didn't go like this. She just kind of, but Jonah and I are like, are you okay? And she just kind of goes like this, and there's blood everywhere. Yo, they just hit someone in the face.
That's her. That's the girl.
With a tear gas canister. She was bleeding from the head.
What is it like to experience tear gas?
It's basically kind of like, it depends on how much you get, but I would say it's kind of like suffocating. It basically, your nasal and your eye ducts basically are just not controllable. You can't control them, and they're just burning. And so not only does that hurt, but it's incredibly I was shocked at how disorienting it was. And so, more seasoned protesters are like, don't start running, because that's when, chaos erupts. And so you just kind of get the tear gas, and you're like, at first you're like, okay, this isn't that bad. And then even with a mask and goggles on, it's completely overwhelming. And if you're going to stay there, you're most likely going to fall to the ground, and you're not going to be able to breathe. So it forces you to disperse to get clean air. And then on my mind, there was hundreds of medics surrounding the 3 or 4 block radius of the Justice Center. And so people kind of like on the front line would come out and be like, I just can't do this anymore. And they'd have a saline solution that they spray your eyes with. And the medics, they're just shocked how much they knew. They're like, don't touch your eyes. Da, 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 da. Here's some milk. Do not touch your eyes. Here's some hand sanitizer. Get that off your hands. But yeah, the pictures don't even do it justice. Like I just can't. I mean, to justify the pushing of a fence or cutting of a fence, or even, this is a debate that I think a lot of people on the left have had, people over property. Like the fact that these people are protecting property and harming thousands and thousands of people in the process is just, it's just shocking. And I think I did want to bring this up. Did you hear what Congressman or Congresswoman Jayapal said yesterday?
No, I didn't.
She just had an amazing quote that a lot of people in Portland have been talking about. She was like, Attorney General Barr, why are we not, tear gassing people who support the president, who are protesting and wanting to lynch Governor Whitmer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the only people. It's primarily black people who've been taking the brunt of this. Those are the people who you are gassing, and it is intentionally for a political agenda, and it's hard to see it any other way, really. I also wanted to say, just I was shocked at the diversity of people. Like,
what kind of people did you see there?
Dude, union workers, lawyers, nurses, doctors, moms, dads, timber workers, veterans, and I'm in every age. There were people who, like, there was a grandma there with the mom. So that was a Friday night, but and then Saturday was pretty crazy because there was even more people. Basically, people were starting to kind of just overwhelm them. People were throwing fireworks at them, and I say this delicately, but when you've been tear gassed, it's hard not to cheer when you see fireworks thrown at federal officers. I'm not promoting violence, and I'm not promoting breaking shit, but when you've been innocently tear gassed, it's hard not to be like, you kind of had that coming when you're tear gassing innocent people day in and day out. But yeah, people started throwing fireworks, and then at one point they just left, and so no one was out there, and so hundreds and hundreds of people started pushing on the fence, and then ultimately after 3 hours of just like people were just getting really angsty and being like, I think it definitely was, kind of losing the message of Black Lives Matter at certain times, because it was just so infuriating to have. But I don't know how they did it. The protesters got it down, and then at that point, all the feds came storming out of the building and just gas, pepper bullets everywhere. It's just interesting because I'm kind of new to this, this type of activism specifically, and it's just kind of interesting that I think it's a assumption every night that even when we are going to probably get tear gassed every single night we come out.
Yeah,
but it's more of the principle of we're showing up, and we are showing up for Black lives. That's what we're doing, and then every night we're getting tear gassed because of that. And we know we're never gonna beat these heavily armed. I mean, there's no way we can. We're building shields and whatnot, and now we're being branded as people who are looking to fight. In reality, we're just looking to protect ourselves from something that I never thought I would honestly see here. Like, oh, that happens other places. Oh, that that happens in other countries. It's shocking. It's just absolutely shocking.
Did you see any leaf blowers?
Oh yeah, man. That shit, innovative as hell. So every time they knock down tear gas on us, every time these probably 50 guys with these just big ass industrial leaf blowers just come in, and these are like, what's shocking about this, these aren't like Antifa, like these are like dads who actually own these leaf blowers, and just coming up and just like blowing it back. And so these feds are fucking dummies are shooting tear gas at people. It's just getting all blown right back at them.
There's also been kidnappings. Have you heard on the ground of any of that kind of thing happening there?
Yeah. Basically, yeah. I mean, it's crazy because this is another tactic that Trump's using to divert us away from talking about the issues that we want to talk about, right? Yeah. Like, yes, this shit is fucked up what's happening, but Trump wants us to focus on this rather than, our movement. But yes, I mean, it's shocking. Like, it's shocking. I think you've seen that it's not just happening in Portland anymore. It's happening in Seattle, New York. And these, especially in Portland now, there are it's a right-wing hotspot that right-wing militias like to come, and they dress like these feds are dressing. They dress in full military regalia. patches, guns. You cannot tell the difference between them. They look very, very similar. And so you see this, you see these people come up to you in a freaking minivan and takes them away. It's insane. Like in Portland, it is not an assumption that someone who's looking like that is a federal troop. It is assumption that they are a Proud Boy or a member of a far right organization. I'm just shocked that the checks and balances have not been. It's basically in Portland you're not actually allowed by law to use tear gas, but
doesn't matter right now.
Doesn't matter. The PPB. So, like, I think one thing that kind of the national narrative did miss, and that needs to be said, is Ted Wheeler, our mayor, is not popular. Not popular. So for him, now, while he may be building a popular national brand with liberals, like, ooh, look at this mayor getting tear gassed, what a badass. He has been actively tear gassing members of the Portland community, specifically people of color, for 60 days. And so for him to stand up there and act as if these are draconian measures is absolutely bullshit. And he needs to be held accountable for what he did is, in my opinion, as worse as Trump and his photo op with the Bible. It was a completely political prop, and who was on Rachel Maddow? It was Ted fucking Wheeler, and he's not part of this Black Lives Matter movement. He has not held the Portland Police Bureau accountable, and like everyone's like, oh yeah, the feds are now leaving Portland. That's new news today. But a lot of people are like, okay, so they're leaving Portland. Does that mean now the Portland police are now going to be tear gassing protesters? Most likely, yes. Saturday night, it was interesting. So Saturday night, the feds coordinated with the Portland police to come through and clear out all the protesters. And Ted Wheeler is the commissioner of the police.
Yeah.
And so it's not okay if the federal government tear gasses people, but it is okay if your people tear gas people. Got it. Okay. I'd be much more convinced of Ted Wheeler's allegiance, and I think a lot of people would, to Black Lives Matter if he was out there on that fucking fence every night getting tear gassed by his own police department. But that's not going to happen.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, what advice would you have for people that want to go out and protest?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. I have some friends who have been more involved and kind of have brought me out to protest. I would just say that, I don't want to scare anyone, but I think you should mentally and emotionally prepare yourself to see things that you maybe haven't ever seen before. I think the protests are changing. I think that the narrative's trying to be flipped by Trump, that these aren't peaceful protesters, and that specifically federal agents will use force at any excuse to use force. They will potentially use it, and you need to be prepared to stand your ground and exercise your constitutional rights in support of Black Lives Matter. And so my advice to you would be, before the feds come to you, or you'll have to buy this shit online, you should buy a low-grade gas mask, you should buy goggles, and you should buy a helmet, and potentially some heavy-duty gloves. It depends on, and even, I know that sounds kind of wild, that's a lot, but if you even want to be in the area and exercise your rights with a sign, that you're going to need that if the tear gas comes out. I know that you may not think that you need that stuff, and I'm being a little alarmist, but if the federal troops do come to whatever city you're in, you really should have that to just protect yourself from the potential harm of the gases that they're using. And I've read that they're using expired gas, as well as a new agent. And by the way, all these agents are banned. You cannot use these agents in warfare. and the Geneva Convention and the United Nations, I believe, you might need to fact check me on this, they are against both like United Nations charters as well as the Geneva Convention.
I've heard that before too.
Specifically tear gas.
Yeah.
So I would just like, especially if you have, maybe a pre-existing condition, you need to protect yourself because, and also on top of this shit, I'm like, COVID-19 is happening right now. And when you get tear gassed, like, it's kind of gross to think about, but when everyone's doing it, it's not that gross. It's just kind of like, oh, wow. Like everyone's just, snot is going to come out of your nose uncontrollably. Yeah. And your tear ducts will just continue to, produce tears, and you'll be coughing.
Joseph, I want to thank you. I want to commend you and all the protesters throughout the country who are standing up for Black Lives Matter. Exactly. I know it can be scary, it can be dangerous, but it's also, I think, it's beautiful to show solidarity and to be among so many people that feel the same way.
It really is, especially in this time. It can kind of feel isolating sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's just really heartwarming to see, everyone coming together in this cause, and that we are not alone. Mm. We're not alone as activists and protesters and people who support Black Lives Matter. This is very much, I think, a special moment in our time as a nation. And I have to say, moments like this do make me proud to be an American.
Yeah.
See people, to me, the real Americans are these protesters. Mm. That's what being an American is all about. And it's really heartwarming.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you.
Johnny, thank you so much, man. It's so good to see you, man.
It's so great to see you too. Hey, if people want to talk to you about these experiences, can they find you anywhere?
Yes, they are more than welcome to find me anywhere. And I can also probably direct you to more probably either people of color, voices of color, who can give their experience, as well as people who've been on the ground longer than me. But feel free to add me on any social channel. My name is Joseph Landoni, and my Twitter and Instagram handle is at JALandoni720. It's going to be JALANDONI 720. And yeah, just message me, follow me, and I'd be more than happy to connect you with local activists who are have their hands much more in this than I do. But Johnny, so good to see you. I appreciate the work that you do so much, and you inspire me, every day to question myself and challenge myself to be a better person, a better political activist. And I think that I just look up to you very greatly, and I'm humbled and honored that you asked me to be part of this.
Thank you so much, Joseph. You're an inspiration as well. What you're doing is amazing. It's courageous, and Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives do matter. Yeah. Take care, Johnny. You have a great rest of your evening, okay?